Chapter 8, Part 3. I don't remember the context, so I'm just going to keep reading. Those performances were all sellouts, due, as usual, to the vast amount of advance publicity, much of which was, as usual, unsolicited. Again, as usual, the clergy helped out, responding the Bernhardt as being on a par of bestiality with one of the creatures of the apocalypse, and who wouldn't rush to see a leopard with 7 heads and 6 horns? Here it was the Anglican cloth that did the groundwork. The Episcopal Bishop of Chicago, in 2 sermons denouncing her so eloquently. Abby wrote him a letter, which the manager saw was reprinted in all newspapers. Your Excellency, I am accustomed when I bring an attraction to your town to spend $400 on advertising. As you have done half the advertising for me, I herewith enclose $200 for the poor of your parish. The press continued to come out with the usual exaggerations and reporters to ask the usual impertinent questions. Is it true, one inquired, that you have had 4 children and never any husband? To which she snorted back, certainly not, but at least that would be better than the case of some of your American women who have had 4 husbands and never any children. Bernhardt enjoyed Chicago. Her quarters at the Palmer House roused in her continual and gleeful mirth, for she occupied the honeymoon suite, an elaborate nightmare in Egyptian style with sofas like Cleopatra's barge, lamps whose bases were bronze sphinxes, and clocks embedded in black marble pyramids. Sarah found excitement in the raw newness and bustle of the great prairie city which Marie Colombier described at the date to be America as it is imagined in Paris, a city of iron with locomotives smoking in the streets, telegraph wires so numerous they hide the sky, banks the size of the Louvre, insurance houses like the Palace of Versailles. All this swarming with 600,000 inhabitants who come and go, frantically running after the almighty dollar. From here the troupe was launched into its back-breaking tour. They traveled via the Sarah Bernhardt Special, an up-to-the-minute conveyance consisting of 3 Pullmans for the personal and her own private car. For the personnel. Apologies. An up-to-the-minute conveyance consisting of 3 Pullmans for the personnel and her own private car, known as a palace car, for Madame Sarah. The secretary costumes and heavy luggage went on ahead in a freight express, also special, and for the passage of both trains all tracks were cleared. The schedule was brutal. There were any number of one-night stands. Often the corps would arrive in a place as late as 6 p.m., give the show at 8:30, then return to the sleepers for a midnight departure. The next day they might travel until another late arrival in the next town, and likely as not be put through a repetition of the same hurried routine. It was tough for the actors. During the 80s, trains were not of the cleanest, and what with no time for a bath at a hotel between arrival in town and the hour for showing up at the theater, they had to wash off the soot as best they could in the cold water and cracked basin of a dressing-room washstand. Food was a problem. Not that American food hasn't always been a problem for any Frenchman. The average table d'hôte dinner on the road was for them merely a barely and somewhat revolting necessary for the preservation of life. The Sarah Bernhardt Special carried no diner and made no station stops where a Fred Harvey lunch counter lady clanged a brass bell and whooped out to passengers to come and get it. There were many days when the players dolefully subsided upon crackers, sardines, fruit, and Apollinaris water. There were other and rarer days when their star, overcome by a sudden pang of concern for her flock, would dispatch Claude, her valet de chambre, forward to their cars with platters of cold meats, salads, and wine. Madame Sarah always had plenty of provender to spare, living as she was in her palace car. The dernier cri, the ne plus ultra in travel luxury. Its walls were of inlay wood, its overhead gas lamps of gleaming brass. Bright turkey carpeting and zebra rugs covered the floor. Draperies of velours trimmed in chenille hung on either side of the doors, and the window tops were decorated with panes of colored glass. The lounge area contained comfortable sofas and easy chairs, elegant with elegant with lace, completely different. Elegant with lace antimacassars, a reading table covered with magazines, a writing desk, an upright piano, card tables, and a number of rubber plants and potted palms. Before the tour finished, it contained a lot more in the way of souvenirs and acquired junk. Careless as she was about possessions, Sarah could never deliberately throw anything away. Admirers were continually bringing her presents. They brought them to the stage door, to her hotel suites. They even waited on station platforms with tributes of vases, paintings, statuettes, music boxes, ornamental bronzes, and further well-intentioned horrors. Always the place was a profusion of flowers, and always suffocatingly overheated by a coal-burning stove, whose fire, even in the warmer climates, was never permitted to go out. Next to this main salon was a dining room with a table seating 10, gleaming with embroidered linen, and the ladies' own crested china, glassware, and flat silver. Off this was a kitchen where two Negro cooks, capital N, strove with perspiring valor to add French flavor to Southern cooking. The star's sleeping quarter was equipped with an immense brass bed, a carved mahogany dressing table, a gilt-framed cheval glass, and a ribbon-trimmed basket for her dog, a highly unpleasant Belgian griffon named Hamlet III. Next door was a smaller bedroom for Madame Gerard, and down the corridor a double compartment which Jarrett shared with Abby when the latter joined up with the tour. At the far end of the car was a commodious observation platform equipped with comfortable wicker chairs. Here, La Bernhardt, swathed to her eyes in furs and scarves, would sit from time to time and watch the passing countryside. On all her countless tours, she'd never traveled without a pair of powerful field glasses. This contradictory woman of frailty yet self-renewing energy had a zestful interest in new places, an alert curiosity to see how people lived, to compare one region with another. She responded with exhilaration to beautiful scenery. She thrilled to watch a sunset or a moon rise. She wasn't able to watch many moons rise from her observation platform after an attempt had been made by a hold-up man who was caught one night riding the rods underneath her car in an attempt to detach it from the rest of the train at a lonely point along the line, where a gang of bandits was waiting to leap on board and make off with Madame's over-publicized jewels. Woo! Where was that? That was fun. That was a fun sentence to read. After this bit of thwarted Western melodrama, the palace car was shunted nightly to a position of security between two of the Pullmans. The incident caused alarm among the more apprehensive members of the troupe, who, with gallant concern less for their lives than for their salaries, placed the latter in their socks and slept with their shoes on tightly laced. Madame Sarah herself reposed with her own lethal weapon strategically placed under her 5 pillows. This was a small, pearl-handled pistol, which she herself admitted was incapable of being fired, but whose presence was apparently a comfort. In the morning, the palace car would be shunted back to its position of regal importance at the end of the train. The car was aptly named, for its stellar occupant lived in it like a sovereign, and her touring routine took on the quality of a royal progress. Before the start of any trip, she would summon the engineer to her presence, shake hands with him, and, through the handiest interpreter, find out how long the man had been in service, if he were married, and if so, how many children he had. If his answers assured her of his reliability as an engineer, she would graciously dismiss him, and at the journey's finish send him up a tip. Occasionally, she'd send along a souvenir for his wife. How the average American engineer's wife reacted to her husband's bringing home a souvenir from a French actress is another story. Inside her ruling palace, Queen Sarah held a continual court as she did in her more stationary one back in Paris. She would invite particular members of her company in for meals, which were as sumptuous as the two cooks could dish up. Afternoons, as the train raced along over rough roadbeds, she would receive for tea, delicately attired in a flowing house gown and handling the jiggling cups and saucers with the ease of a dowager duchess and the ancient stability of a Faubourg Saint Germain mansion. Sometimes she would hold gatherings of informal entertainment, when someone would perform on the upright piano and someone else would sing or go into a music hall turn. Sometimes they'd act out charades or play dominoes. Sometimes there would be a card game, and at that pastime, sometimes Sarah cheated a little. Every now and then, she jotted down notes for the memoirs she was to write for the following year. Every now and then, she jotted down notes for the memoirs she was to write the following year. These contain a few interesting statements regarding her private philosophy. Little bothers me, she wrote. You should live for those who know and appreciate you, who judge and absolve you, and for whom you have love and indulgence. The rest is merely the crowd, from whom one can expect only fleeting emotions, good or bad, which leave no trace. One should hate very little, because it's extremely fatiguing. One should despise much, forgive often, and never forget. Pardon does not bring with it forgetfulness, at least not for me. Sarah Bernhardt never forgot she was the first and foremost an actress. She possessed the conscientiousness of the dedicated musician who, whether at home or on tour, would never dream of letting a day go by without a certain number of practice hours. She was continually calling on members of her cast to restage a scene or run through a line rehearsal. She might hold a reading of a play which had struck her as a possible addition to her large repertoire, and if she liked it, she'd assign the parts and start rehearsing it then and there above the clacking of the wheels, the whooping of the whistle, and the billowing clouds of choking soot from a tunnel passage. Such was to be Sarah Bernhardt's touring routine during the next 40 years of her career. As late as 1915, when she was 71, her American manager wrote, "Her energy and enthusiasm were endless. I never saw her show the slightest fatigue. I never saw her bored. I never saw her miss a beautiful bit of scenery from the car window or fail to appreciate a good joke." The steady members of the Palace Car Court, who were invited in for daily attendance in addition to the ever-present Madame Gerard, were Jarrett and Abby, Jean Bernhardt, Jean, Marie Colombier, and the actor Angelo. Angelo was the favorite courtier, being both leading man and official lover. He was handsome and ingratiating. As an actor, not overly gifted. As a lover, who knows? Who, for that matter, knows how gifted as such were the rest of her lovers or what any of them meant to her? When Madame Sarah went on tour, she carried along a secretary, a lady's maid, 2 theater dressers, her maitre d'hotel, and occasionally her chef. She sometimes carried along an attractive young actor as leading man to double in brass as lover for the duration of the tour. On this, her first United States venture, Angelo seems successfully to have fulfilled both duties. On her 7th and 3rd from final American visit in 1910, the actor cast for the double bill was the absurd and overly beautiful Lou Telgin, who shortly afterward married Geraldine Farrar. Madame Bernhardt was by then 66 and Mr. Telligin some 35 years her junior. Angelo must have found his off-stage role interesting, if not at times hair-raising. His mistress's passion for collecting exotic live pets found outlet as their route carried them south. At one stop, she brought on board 2 large black snakes, which seemed harmless enough until they started a wriggling journey through the other cars. And when one of them writhed cozily up onto the seat beside the company's wig dresser, The ensuing hysteria was such that the terrible Mr. Jarrett had the creatures hurled off the train. In Louisiana, Sarah purchased a small alligator whom she named Aligaga. It was a friendly little reptile which manifested a devotion to its owner, following her about in her dressing rooms, her hotel suites, her private car. During meals, it lay docilely at her feet at night, and at night it had a cozy habit of crawling under the covers of her bed. Writing about this last locale, Andre Castellet remarks, "We do not know the reactions of Angelo. Aligaga's days were cut short by an early demise due, according to Marie Colombier, to a surfeit of champagne." Aligaga was not the only Louisiana alligator Sarah Bernhardt was to acquire. This is so sad. During a subsequent tour some 20 years later, there was staged for her the much publicized crocodile hunt, when she was the guest of Mr. Charles Bell, a millionaire who owned a vast plantation outside of Lake Charles. The place boasted a number of lakes, a river, and some rare bird and animal specimens. Sarah insisted that in such terrain there must be crocodiles. She was unaware that in this country they were alligators, and she requested that a crocodile hunt be organized. As there wasn't a trace of either crocodile or alligator on the estate, the obliging Mr. Bell, sent off telegrams in all directions and managed to get hold of a baby gator, which was dumped into one of the lakes. The next morning was chilly, and Madame Sarah emerged in a sealskin coat carrying a vast muff. After a bit, she tossed coat and muff aside to reveal herself dressed as for an operetta safari, with high-heeled shooting boots and a white suede jacket on the lapel of which was pinned a wilting hibiscus blossom. Brandishing a wide-brimmed hat trimmed with pheasant feathers, she shouted dramatically for the beaters to bring forth the pirogues. I don't know what that is. There being neither beaters nor pirogues, the hunting party had to make do with Mr. Bell, a gardener, and a motorboat. They set forth but could track down no prey. Finally, the gardener located the baby gator, tied its foot to a line, handed the other end to Madame, and she hauled in her trophy only to find out that the beastie was in a state of hibernation. On being informed that it would in all likelihood sleep for 3 months, she had it shipped via freighter to her country house at Belle Isle while she took a fast steamer back to France. When the creature arrived, it was still in its torpor. Sarah uncrated it herself. Oh my God. The tiny Manchester Terrier she had then, excited by the strange reptilian, barked madly and started snapping at its nose. The alligator, alas, came suddenly out of its long winter's sleep and snapped back, and the small dog disappeared down the tooth-lined maw. Oh, this is fucking horrible. Sorry, guys. Madame's secretary, Pitou, grabbed a gun and shot the monster, and Sarah, grief-stricken over the loss of her terrier, had the gator's head dissevered, mounted, and hung on in her hall. She would point it out to her guests and say mournfully, "My beloved little dog, his tomb." It was during this first United States tour that Sarah Bernhardt came near to being lost to the world and the rest of her company, along with her through the collapse of a railroad bridge during the heavy spring floods. It was during this first United States tour that Sarah Bernhardt came near to being lost to the world and the rest of her company along with her through the collapse of a railroad bridge during the heavy spring floods. The bridge spanned the Bay St. Louis outside of New Orleans. I say it did because in her own memories, Madame says it did, as does Marie Colombier, and Castellot locates it in that general vicinity. But then the inevitable contradictions arise when Bernhardt herself, giving her granddaughter another sight in Louisiana, writes that the disaster was missed by seconds while crossing the Ohio River. As the French are noted for their accuracy in regard to American geography, we can dismiss the exact locale as being of little interest. What happened was that as the Sarah Bernhardt special was going along at its customary clip, the brakes suddenly went out on the train. On. The brakes suddenly went on, and the train came to a full stop at a small station located near a river which was overflowing its banks. In a few minutes, Sarah, looking out her window, could see Jarrett in frenzied, animated conversation with a man in dungarees who was standing quite still, stubbornly shaking his head. After a time, they walked over to the train and entered Madame Bernhardt's lounge. Jarrett introduced the man as the engineer and added the chilling information that turbulent waters had weakened the supports of a bridge lying shortly ahead of them, and the engineer was afraid to risk a crossing. There was no other way of getting around the five-state flood unless they retracked back halfway to Cincinnati. This would mean a 2-day delay in reaching their next show town, New Orleans, where she was informed the box office had been completely sold out. However, the powerful impresario had brought some of the persuasive Jarrett pressure to bear, and the engineer had finally agreed to try for a dash across the weekend bridge, provided they would give him $2,500 in advance to buy a money order made out in his wife's name, which he would entrust to the local station master. If the venture turned out successfully, the engineer would refund the money. Jarrett fixed Madame with his cold blue eyes and asked how she felt about taking a chance. Madame Quanmeme's love of a challenge, plus the prospect of that sold-out box office in New Orleans, immediately prompted her to exclaim that, of course she'd take the chance, and she called to Mon Petite Dame to bring forth her money bag. Wow, that is some wow. One of the more imponderable eccentricities of Sarah Bernhardt was her refusal throughout her long life, throughout the thick and thin of her vast fortunes gained and squandered, ever to have a checking account in any bank. Oh, the money, yeah. She insisted upon being paid in gold coins, which she carried with her, or entrusted to Madame Gerard in a horrifyingly battered old chamois bag. Out of this she paid her company, her servants, her creditors, doling out the coins with sensitive and seemingly reluctant fingers. There was something curiously mindful of the medieval miser in the gesture. For extravagant as she was and given to occasional impulsive acts of exaggerated generosity, she hated the physical parting with a single gleaming piece. When her fortunes were at high peak and the profits too cumbersome for the chamois bag, she put the golden overflow in a middle-bound chest which she kept under her bed. Gerard produced the bag, which Sarah handed over to Jarrett, telling him to take out $2,500 in coins. Then suddenly she hesitated. Had they better, she asked, inform the rest of the troop about the bridge and give them a chance of staying on the train or getting off at this station? Thank you. She summoned the entire company before her, addressing them as Messieurs et Braves Enfants. She told them of the peril lying ahead and delivered such an eloquent eve of battle speech. Every one of them, with the exception of an 18-year-old ingenue and an assistant treasurer, declared to stay. The company returned to their Pullmans, the engineer returned to his iron horse, and the train started. The occupants of the palace car sat rigid but intrepid. Jarrett furiously puffed a cigar in defiance of Madame's ruling that no tobacco could ever be smoked in her presence. Angelo looked handsomely brave but ashen. Marie Colombier took Hamlet III onto her lap and started brushing him. Pyrrhon, the character actor, hummed a tune somewhat off-key. Madame Gerard sporadically blessed herself. Sarah sat with a protective arm around Jean, who found a ghoulish pleasure in reminding her sister that her hotel room the previous night had been number 13 and that a stage door fan had tossed a sprig of heather at her. Sarah, who harbored numerous obsessive superstitions, had a horror of the number 13 and regarded the least brush of a sprig of heather as baneful as the evil eye, and would, under less tense circumstances, have slapped Jean in the face. Instead, she silently addressed her convent superior, Mary Saint-Sophie, who she felt must surely be in heaven, suggesting that the saintly soul use her influence with the holy powers to have them sustain the bridge. By now the engineer had worked up full steam, and the train was going at mad top speed. It careened around corners at hair-raising angles, swayed, rocked, jounced, and hurtled a couple of passengers from their seats. All at once they knew they were on the bridge. Sarah glanced down at the roiling floodwaters, then hastily cast her eyes heavenward in further communication with Mother Saint Sophie. Jarrett's cigar took on the aspect of a volcano about to erupt, and Madame Gerard looked more as though she were doing some sort of sitting down exercise than repeatedly crossing herself. Piron's tune ended in a series of gulping sounds, and Marie Colombier brushed Hamlet III so violently he bit her. The train rocked more crazily than ever. Wild groaning noises issued from the tracks, and Jean, in manic gaiety, called out, "Here we go doubting, sister!" Then gradually the wheels began turning more regularly. The roadbed below them felt firm. The engine, panting like a pursued animal finding shelter, slowed down and came to a halt. People in the other cars shouted, "We're across!" And at that, there arose from behind them a sound of thunder. Bernhardt, rushing to the observation platform, arrived in time to see a column of water rising like a majestic geyser, which, when it fell back, revealed the two broken halves of the bridge, their ends plunged into the water. The entire troop, relieved and jubilant, piled into the palace car to hug and congratulate their leader as though she were Joan of Arc, who had just successfully raised the siege of Orleans. She embraced them all and ordered rounds of champagne. She also sent up word to the engineer, telling him that he and his wife might keep the $2,500. However, as she looked about at her trusting flock, her conscience, which, like her sacred word of honor, was unpredictable, began to bother her. She blamed herself for risking these persons' lives in her impulsive and ego-prompted act. In her memoirs, she wrote, "For a long time, my nights were troubled by frightful nightmares. When any player spoke to me of a baby, a mother, a spouse back home, I'd turn pale, and a profound emotion would agonize me. I felt a contemptuous pity for the I that I was." The I, Sarah Bernhardt was, continued its eventful journey. In New Orleans, she met with harsh public criticism because, for some uncharacteristic whim, she refused to give a charity performance for the French-speaking flood victims. They played a one-night stand in Mobile, where the stage was so small, the sets didn't fit, and the actors had to make their entrances at such grotesque angles. Their star went into fits of hysterical giggling, fled from the stage, and Jarrett had to refund the money at the box office. This was not the only occasion during the tour that the ferocious gentleman had to go to such painful measures. Madame Bernhardt, conditioned to sell out audiences, could never endure the sight of empty seats, and on the occasions, which happily were few, when the houses were poor, she'd go conveniently into a crise de nerfs, from which Jarrett knew there'd be no rousing her until he had canceled the performance. He could afford to be philosophical about such exigencies. The losses of a night or two were far outbalanced by the profits he was making. In Georgia, as the Sarah Bernhardt special stopped for engine water at a country siding, its leading passenger, beholding through her window a flock of crows, ordered the engineer to hold the train there for a half hour while she and the sports-minded members of the company got out to enjoy a little bird shooting. Hardly had the first gun sounded than a sheriff appeared, arrested the hunters, loaded them into a buckboard, and drove them to his house. His ground for arrest was not the shooting of the crows, which heaven knew was a benefit to the local farmers, but because it was Sunday, and these foreigners were breaking the Sabbath law. Once arrived at his house, the sheriff locked his captives in the parlor, while he went into an adjoining bedroom to pray and consult the Bible. After due and pious consultation, he emerged, fined the culprits an overall sum of $1.50, and released them to run back across the fields to their train. In Toledo, some newspaper men, in a mistaken gesture of tribute, serenaded the great actress under her window at 8 in the morning, and, for their efforts, received the contents of a pitcher of water dumped onto their upraised faces. In transit one night, there broke out in the car next to Bernhardt's a fight between two male members of the Corps. Their star, hearing the commotion, leapt from her bed and, clad only in her nightgown, rushed to fling herself between the two belligerents who, after such heroic intervention, shamefacedly shook hands and retired each to his bed. It was April when the tour reached Buffalo for a week's stand. Madame, instead of going to a hotel, chose to live in her palace car, which was backed into a wooded park beside a brook. Every evening an open carriage arrived to drive her through the soft spring air to the theater, and she declared it was the next best thing to a trot around the lakes in the Bois de Boulogne. When she returned to New York, she had given 157 performances in 51 cities. Frou Frou 40 times, Adrienne Lecouvreur 17, Hernami 13, Les Sphinx 6, Phaedra 6, Princess Georges 7, Les Étrangers 3, and of course the hardy lady of the perennial camellias 65. It was a triumphal return, and the papers were full of the news. For over 6 months, the name Sarah Bernhardt had been a cliché in the press. Reports of her box office receipts had, along with all the other gossip, been grossly exaggerated, and the magazine Puck, a blatantly anti-Semitic publication, printed a cruel cartoon showing her with an exaggerated hooked nose, holding a tiny dog amid a shower of gold. Its title was The Jewish Danae. D-A-N-A-E, Danae. I don't know what that means. Judge, another periodical, paid her a kinder tribute. We shall miss the tearing terror of Sarah Bernhardt. We shall miss her smile of love and her expression of trust and confidence. We shall regret the absence of that thin countenance on whose surface appeared more of the counterfeited soul than anybody has succeeded in picturing. We shall miss that magnificently cultured voice, those secluded eyes, those conspicuous teeth, that serpentine twist of the body, and the tiger too. But our loss will be her gain. She takes about $500,000 in clear profits with her, and have we not our Clara Morris and her regular prescriptions left? On May 3rd, she gave a farewell matinee of La Dame. Her dressing room and the corridor leading to it were stacked with over 130 bouquets and wreaths. The audience went gratifyingly wild. At the final curtain, the great Italian actor Tommaso Salvini strode onto the stage to present her with a jewel box of lapis lazuli. And America's own Mary Anderson, in the exquisite loveliness of her dewy youth, ran shyly out to give her a pin of turquoise forget-me-nots. A few days later, Sarah Bernhardt set sail for France. Judge had somewhat overestimated her profits, but the actual figure was not to be sneezed at, for stashed in her metal-bound chest and the battered chamois bag was $194,000 in gleaming gold coins.